Thank you all. It's really an honor to be here to talk to you about what we learned on information acquisition and the return to data for the firms. As we learned in the morning, data and information are becoming the foundation for many of the business model, and it's going to be crucial for business decisions. And as you can see, more and more firms are making huge investment on acquiring and using this information. And as shown by this little survey among the top management of Fortune 1000 firms, these firms have been investing a lot on big data and AI for the last few years. But what we don't really know is what exactly do these data do for their business operation. For example, what type of the data these firms are collecting, how are these data used, and eventually what type of the return do they generate for these firms. We may have some thought about what's going on with the large firms, but I guess the more interesting and more policy-relevant question would be, what happens if you give data access to small firms on the street or a little Taobao shop? What would happen to them? How are they going to use the data? So today, I'm really going to talk about these three questions. First, is information valuable for the firms? And move one step forward, how is information valuable for firms implementing their strategies? And conditioning on the answer to the first two questions, what can the platform do to provide information in order to help these firms grow? So the answer to the last question is actually quite supplemental to what Dr. Zhang just talked about. And it brings up another thing that the platforms can do to achieve its policy objective. Consider a platform that occupies a central position of collecting and distributing information. What this implies is that it really can determine the cost, the type, and the quality of the information it provides to its participant. And using this ability, it then can start to think about what should be do in terms of providing information to achieve the policy objective it cares about. For example, promoting the growth of small and young firms. But in order to answer this question, we really need to understand how the firms are using and are valuing these informations. For example, what are the values of different informations for different firms? And why are these information useful? And how does that information interact with their strategies? And also, how sensitive they are toward the changing cost of this information. So today, we're going to focus on a particular empirical setting to try to answer these questions. And our setting is going to be a large e-commerce platform that really hosts millions of firms, large and small. And we're going to focus on a product that's called Business Advisor, which is an official data analytic tools that the platforms provide to all of its sellers. And since its first launching in 2015, the free basic module of this information product have served more than 30 million firms. So after several rounds of upgrades, this product now can really provide information on essentially all aspects of their business operation. But today, we're only going to focus on three more important modules, which are market, traffic, and competition. So let's first look at who are the users of these firms. Ever since it was first launched, the adoption rate has been increasing steadily. But although the free module was essentially adopted by more than 90% of the active firms on the platform, the free module is widely adopted, but really these paid modules, like the one I just talked about, only are used by the large sellers. These 5% of the sellers who paid for information access account for more than 50% of the market share. So firms are buying information, but when do they do that? And we find out that they buy information precisely when they need to implement certain strategies. For example, what we found is during the week they made the purchase of an information module, they really increase the frequency of implementing certain strategy. In particular, they tend to launch more new product. They change the title of the product for repositioning or search engine optimization. And this effect is very concentrated among the small sellers. So now we have known firms are making investment to buy information to help them implement strategies. But is that investment worth it? Does it really reflect it in their revenues and growth? What we found is the answer is yes to that question. So what we do here is, based on a matching example, we compare the revenue growth of the users who purchased information with those who didn't, and we see what happened before and after they pay for that information access. And what we found, as you can see on this graph, for all the 4 modules that we care about, it seems that the revenue growth is really highly correlated with the adoption decision of that information product. And this effect is even more prevalent and is stronger among the small seller as compared to the average firms. The small sellers, the revenue grows even more than the baseline. And how were they managed to do it? They mostly managed to do it by attracting more internet traffics. And of course, there are many strategies you can do to attract internet traffic. One of those could be better marketing. The other could be launching new product, like exactly what they do when they buy the information. So we have shown that information can be quite valuable for firms' revenue growth. But what we also see is that these firms are very sensitive to the cost change in acquiring those information. Here's a graph showing number of firms making the purchase of a particular information module over time, and the black line indicates the cost they pay. So what you see is very recently, there's a very significant jump in prices, and almost immediately you see a very large jump in the adoption. If we quantify that effect, what turned out to be the case is that for every 1% increase in the prices, there's more than 3.5% decline in the likelihood of adoption. And intuitively, as you may imagine, the effect is much stronger among the small and young firms who might be more credit constrained. So with these results, what we do next is we try to understand the firm's behavior by writing down a simple model to rationalize what we found in the data. So in our model, the firms decide if they want to implement a certain set of strategy and which strategy they're going to implement. And what determines whether they want to implement that strategy is how much they value different types of information they may have access to. And conditioning on that decision, the firms are going to decide, okay, I'm going to implement a strategy, so I want to see if I want to buy the information to help me do that. And this is a case where the price elasticity is going to play a role. So after these 2 steps, then the firm then the model is going to then we're going to generate their sales, and the sales is also going to be dependent on their own characteristics. So the model is not covering all the belief updating process or so forth. It only meant to capture the empirical patterns of what the firms are actually doing. So what can the model help us understand? With the model, we are able to answer the question about how different types of information are valued by different types of the firms. So here's a graph shows the distribution of the valuation for 5 major categories of the information that these information modules are covering, like aggregate demand, competitors, consumer demographic, top ranking, and also the traffic sources. As it turned out to be the case that, indeed, for the average firms, all these information are valued positively, and they're quite valuable. Even though for some of them, especially like competitors and consumer demographic, the dispersion of the valuation is very large, but still on average, you see the positive valuation there. And what I want to highlight is that it seems that the traffic sources, like where your internet traffics are coming from, seems to be the most important and the most interested subject these firms are paying attention to. But what is a little bit surprising from this analysis is that you may imagine the large and small firms are going to differ significantly in terms of how they value different types of information, but it turned out that there's not a huge differences in their valuation. But if we somehow classify the firms along another dimension, which is their age, then in that case, the young firms and the established firm are quite different in terms of like how they think the value of the information are. For example, the young firms really pay attention to the things that are very related and are very pertinent to themselves. For example, they pay a lot more attention to things like the traffic, who are visiting their stores as represented by the consumer demographics, and also how their immediate competitors are doing. But on the other hand, the more established firms tend to pay more attention to things like aggregate demand. So they may have, they may think the overall understanding the overall market trend is going to be more useful. And we are also trying to quantify the difference in numbers, and those numbers reflected in the weekly sales cases. So with these two graphs, as well as some estimation about their price elasticity, we can now have we now get a better understanding about what the firms are behaving, conditioning on the type of information they get. So the next thing we can do is we can switch role and think about what the platform can do. In particular, how the platform can provide information to these firms in order to achieve the objective they care about. And some of the objectives may include promoting the overall growth, maintaining a relatively high level of competitiveness, and also they want to make money by selling this data. Now, I guess the interesting question is it possible to simultaneously achieve all of these goals by choosing a proper way to provide information? And so the next set of exercise, what we try is we consider what if we change the pricing scheme of the 5 modules we just mentioned, and we will see how the firm will react in that context, and eventually what are the implications for the policy objective that the platforms care about. And so each dot on this graph is what will happen for under one particular set of the pricing scheme for the information module. And as it turned out, you can actually achieve both high growth and maintain a high level of competition with a properly chosen set of pricing rules. But what is the key to really achieve that goal is that you have to incentivize information adoption by the small and young firms. Because as you may remember, these are the firms that are really gaining a lot from accessing information, but they are also tend to be much more price sensitive. So I will just conclude about what we found. So we have tried to answer the 3 questions that I posed at the beginning of this talk. First, is information valuable? The short answer is yes, information are valued by the firms, and accessing to information correlates strongly with the revenue growth. And the firms are valuing the information as the information facilitates their decision-making processes. So guided with how the firms are going to react to different set of information they have at hand, the platform can design a set of rules to provide information to these sellers and to achieve its policy goals. But in order to really answer the questions of the platform faced, so we have to dive into the more details about how firms might react if we change the information environment. For example, how do the firms actually update their belief given the information? And why are certain information more useful than the others? And can we make them even more useful? And also, given how valuable this information might be, why the firms are still so price sensitive? Can we do something like targeted trial to make it easier for the small and young firm to adopt the information? The answer to these questions are going to be the key for the platforms to design a better set of rules to provide information to the seller in order to promote a more sustainable and equitable growth. That's it for my talk, and thank you so much for listening, and we really appreciate your feedback.